To the set, Jim Townsend, the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO Policy. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jim. We heard there in that report a couple of details about how the mission unfolded. When we talk about something like this, what are the costs to mount a rescue operation of this scope? I mean, especially considering that we heard that several U.S. aircraft were destroyed while they were searching for the airman.
Well, the military, particularly the Air Force, is always ready to do this kind of thing to rescue pilots. So this is something, there is a standing unit or a couple of standing units that do this kind of rescue. But it also involves refueling tankers. It involves Army special operations. This one also involved the Navy SEALs. There was a lot of other troops into the hundreds that were involved one way or another in this pretty daring rescue. It was the largest I've heard of. And so I think we're going to hear a lot more detail in the coming weeks. And I'm sure there's a Hollywood movie coming out of this as well. But it's something that really shows these commandos and others who do this kind of combat search and rescue, highly trained, highly efficient, and we can only be so thankful that they were as good as they were with doing this kind of job.
Now, when we're looking at this, we know the Iranians were also searching for the missing airman. You know, there were reports on the state media that they were offering a rather substantial award to anybody who could find them. That didn't happen. The U.S. found him, but this could have gone very wrong for Washington. So, are we, looking at a communications disaster that was averted for the president? And is he going to be able to spin this as a win?
Well, I think for sure we have avoided a real tragedy, both for the pilot himself and his family and all of the others that were involved in the rescue as well. If this had not gone right, it could have been a tragedy on top of a propaganda victory for the Iranians and that type of thing. But it went well. And I hope the next one goes well because there'll be another one. If these things happen during war, and the next couple of weeks, it looks like there's going to be a lot of this kind of airstrikes and this type of thing that can, bring these pilots into harm's way. And we just hope that, this is something that we'll be able to avoid. And of course, the president is trumpeting. You're right about it. He's looking on this as a victory. I'll give him that for sure. And let's just hope we don't have another one like this.
Now, when this is the first known instance of a U.S. combat aircraft being shot down since the war began. And it seems to contradict what Donald Trump and the administration has been saying about how Washington has established air superiority over Iran. We're 6 weeks in. So what does this tell us about Iran's capabilities at this point?
Well, that's a really good point. And I think it tells us a lot of things. And number one is something that a lot of people know is that you're never 100% sure that you've got air superiority or anything else when it comes to warfare. It is always the unknown that grabs you. And I think in this case, there was certainly the underestimation of the damage done in those early strikes, that a lot of the Iranian capabilities survived that and is now being used. They might not have as much as they did, but they have enough to cause havoc like this. And losing a pilot like this in a plane is a big deal. So if they just have a handful of surface-to-air missiles, that's something we have to worry about. So yes, I think this is something where there was a bit of a underestimation of the kind of damage that was done, and they're going to have to go back and restrike some of these targets.
Now, also, President Trump, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, have liked to trot out this 90% number, saying that since the war has started, Iran has declined shooting off missiles by 90%. And that sounds rather impressive, but that doesn't mean that 90% of Iran's missiles have been destroyed. And there were recent reports saying that actually Tehran is able to dig out some of the sites that have already been struck of their missile launchers. So what does that do to President Trump's timeline of exiting this war? Because he said, he wants to wrap it up in 2 to 3 weeks. Is that feasible?
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. And that's one thing I've gone through in my time in the Pentagon, lots of conflict, beginning with Desert Storm. And Using numbers like 90% or will be finished in 3 weeks is always dangerous because you just don't know. And a number like 90%, as you point out, it can mean a lot of different things. So I think what we're seeing is that while they might have been diminished in terms of their capability, it's not all gone. That's number one. Number two, putting a timeline on this, yeah, they might have plans right now for a couple more weeks of strikes, but that doesn't mean that therefore, like a light switch, the war will be over and we're going to leave. They're going to still have to decide what to do about the Straits of Hormuz. They'll have to see how well those strikes went. I mean, we've seen that the strikes can be successful and sometimes they're not. So they might have to stay around a bit longer to do more strikes. There's a lot of variables involved in setting up a timeline and also determining what's called missile math. How many missiles are left? How many hit the target? That kind of thing. Missile math is a fine art. It's not a science. So I think we're going to have to sit back and listen to what he says. The president. He says 3 weeks. We'll see. But all of us who are watching need to know that the unknown is lurking out there, and that will impact what that timeline does.
Yeah, speaking of timelines and also the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump resurrected his 10-day deadline yesterday in a social media post warning that Iran has 48 hours, which now would be 24 hours, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, make a deal, or else hell. And as we heard, the Iranians dismissed that. They kind of called that, pathetic and unhinged. So at this point, now that he's, brought this back up again, has he boxed himself into a corner here with this ultimatum?
Well, every time we think he has boxed himself in, he seems to slip out. And I think what we're seeing here is that these are tactics. He's using these threats to try to box in the Iranians. He's trying to use something that he feels would scare them, something that he feels would really undermine whatever plans they might have, so that makes them want to sit down and talk. As we've heard, that's not really working very well. I think there are some exchanges going on behind the scenes. At least that's what I've heard. Whether they're having any impact, I don't know. But one thing we have seen with the president, both in his negotiations with Russia and over Ukraine and here as well, is that he is very flexible in terms of moving deadlines. So anytime he feels he's in a box, he'll just move the deadline, and that's kind of how he deals with his negotiations. He'll use a deadline if he thinks he'll get something from it. If nothing comes from his deadline, he'll just move it and do something else.
Thank you so